The diner was loud with the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversations, but everything shifted when it happened. A sharp voice cut through the air, freezing forks halfway to mouths and turning heads toward the corner booth. Emily stood there, tray in hand, her face pale as she stared at the dark stains spreading across the tailored jacket of the man in front of her. The sauce she had carried only seconds earlier now dripped down his sleeve, pooling against the starched white of his shirt. He rose slowly, towering over her, his expression a mask of fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His words carried across the room like a slap. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The tray trembled in her hands. She had been on her feet since early morning, running between tables, making just enough in tips to cover groceries and the electricity bill. One mistake, one slip, and now this. The man didn't lower his voice. If anything, he seemed to feed on the silence around them, his anger swelling in front of the watching crowd. "This jacket costs more than you probably make in a month, and you..." He jabbed a finger at her. You can't even handle a plate of food without ruining someone's night?" Heat burned at the corners of her eyes, but she held it back. She thought of her mother at home, coughing in the bedroom of their tiny apartment, and of the rent due at the end of the week. She couldn't lose this job, not like this. The manager hurried forward, whispering frantic apologies, but the man barely looked at him. His fury stayed locked on Emily, as if she alone carried the weight of his collapsing world. Every person in that diner was watching, some with pity, some with discomfort, but no one stepped in. Emily felt herself shrinking under the weight of it all, ready to disappear into the floor. And then, almost without thinking, she lifted her chin. Her voice was small but steady. She called him by a name he hadn't heard in decades. "Ricky." The room stilled again. Not because of the spilled sauce this time, but because of that single word, quiet and sharp, landing like a stone dropped into still water. The man froze, his anger faltered. For the first time all evening he looked at her, really looked at her. And what he saw left him shaken. The name hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. Ricky. No one else in that diner knew what it meant, but the way the man's expression cracked told its own story. His anger slipped, replaced by something rawer, confusion, disbelief. He stared at Emily as though she had peeled back a layer of time and reached for the boy he used to be. The manager looked from one to the other, unsure what was happening. "Sir, if you'll just allow me to handle—" "Quiet!" the man snapped, though his voice had lost its bite. He didn't take his eyes off Emily. Her hands were still trembling, but she didn't look away. She hadn't spoken that name in years, yet it came out of her mouth as naturally as breathing. The name of the boy who used to walk her home from school, the boy who swore he would never let her feel small. The diner waited. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing they were witnessing something more than a simple argument. The man's lips parted, his voice was unsteady, stripped of its earlier arrogance. Who are you?" Emily let out a shaky laugh, not because anything was funny, but because of the sheer absurdity of it all. "You don't recognise me?" she asked softly. "After everything? After all those years?" He blinked, his jaw tightening, searching her face. For a moment he almost said no. But then his eyes caught the faint freckles across her nose, the stubborn set of her chin, and something inside him faltered. "Emily," he whispered, as though saying the name would summon ghosts. The tray in her hands felt suddenly too heavy. She set it down on the counter beside her and folded her arms tightly, bracing herself. "It's been a long time, Ricky." The man who moments ago had been shouting about money and jackets and ruined dinners now stood in stunned silence, his polished world cracking open in the middle of a crowded diner. And for the first time that night, Emily felt the balance of power shift. The silence stretched, long enough that even the clinking of silverware in the diner seemed to fade. Richard Creed, no longer the untouchable man in a tailored suit, but Ricky, the boy she once knew, looked like someone had pulled the ground out from beneath him. "Emily," he said again, firmer this time, like he was trying to convince himself she was real. What are you doing here?" Her laugh came out sharp, more bitter than amused. "Working. What does it look like? I serve tables so I can pay rent and keep the lights on." The words cut him deeper than she intended. His gaze flicked to the manager, hovering nervously at the edge, then back to her. The man who had just demanded her firing now looked unsettled, like the script had been snatched from his hands. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, almost to himself. Emily crossed her arms, steadying the storm inside her. "Neither should you, not if you're still the boy I knew." The weight of her words hung heavy, pressing into both of them. For Emily, it was years of swallowed anger rising to the surface. For Richard, it was a reminder of a promise broken so long ago that he had nearly convinced himself it never existed. Around them, whispers rippled through the room. Customers craned their necks, sensing the tension but not understanding the history behind it. The manager finally stepped forward, voice low and urgent. "Sir, maybe we should move this conversation somewhere more private." Richard didn't argue. He just nodded, his eyes never leaving Emily. "Come with me," he said quietly. It was not a demand, not this time. Emily hesitated, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to walk out, to leave him standing there humiliated. But another part, the part that remembered fire escapes and shared secrets, needed to hear what he had to say. So she followed him. As they slipped through the side door into a quieter back room, the noise of the diner faded, leaving only the echo of the past between them. The door clicked shut behind them, muting the buzz of the diner. The room smelled faintly of coffee grounds and cleaning supplies, a storage space with a single flickering light overhead. It wasn't the kind of place for confessions, but maybe that was why it felt so heavy, so real. Richard leaned against the wall, running a hand over his face. The anger that had carried him only minutes ago was gone, stripped away like paint in the rain. What remained was something closer to fear. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice lower now, more human. "How are you here, Emily, after all these years, after everything?" Emily folded her arms tight across her chest. She had promised herself if she ever saw him again, she wouldn't tremble, she wouldn't let him see the hurt. But standing in front of him now, the weight of the past pressed against her ribs. "You left," she said simply. "That's how. One night you were there, swearing you'd never forget, swearing we'd get out together, and then gone, no goodbye, not even a note, just silence." Richard's eyes closed as though the memory itself stung. "It wasn't that simple. It was for me," she shot back, her voice breaking on the edges. "I was the one still there, Ricky. I was the one cleaning up the pieces after your family vanished. You don't know what it did to us, what it did to me." The sound of her voice cracked the polished armour he wore so carefully. For a moment, he wasn't the powerful man with a company and skyscraper offices. He was just a boy again, cornered by his own guilt. "I thought leaving would keep you safe," he whispered, almost pleading, though he wasn't sure with whom, her or himself. Emily shook her head slowly. "Safe? You don't get to rewrite it like that. You ran, Ricky, and I stayed." The silence between them thickened, heavy with 2 decades of things unsaid. Neither of them moved. The only sound was the low hum of the light above, buzzing like a heartbeat that refused to let the past rest. The silence pressed on them until Emily couldn't hold it in any longer. Her eyes burned, not with fresh tears, but with memories she had carried like scars. "Do you remember that night?" she asked, her voice trembling but firm. "The alley behind my building. My dad. The shouting. You saw it, didn't you?" Richard's chest tightened. He had spent years burying that memory, shoving it so deep that success and money became a kind of dirt piled on top, but no amount of wealth could erase it. He nodded, barely. Emily's breath hitched, but she pushed forward. "I was 8 years old, Ricky. I heard the noise and ran to the window. My dad was cornered by men I'd never seen before, men who smiled like wolves. I saw them push him against the wall, and I saw you, standing there in the shadows, frozen. You didn't move, you didn't say a word, you just disappeared." Richard lowered his head, shame pressing heavy on his shoulders. "I was 10. I was terrified. I thought if I made a sound they'd come for me too." Her voice broke into a whisper, soft but cutting. "And they did come. For us. My dad never walked the same again after that night. He carried the pain every single day until it killed him. Do you know what it's like watching the strongest man you know fade away because someone else was too scared to help?" The words pierced him deeper than any insult ever could. His eyes stung, and for once he didn't hide it. He saw her not as the waitress in a stained apron, but as the little girl on that fire escape, clutching her knees to her chest, waiting for someone who never came. Emily's arms loosened at her sides, but her expression didn't soften. "You promised me, Ricky. You promised we'd get out together, that we'd never forget where we came from. But the minute you had a chance, you left us behind like none of it mattered." Richard swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. "It mattered, more than anything. That's why I built everything I did, because I swore I'd never feel that powerless again." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. He hadn't just built an empire out of ambition, he had built it out of fear. And now, standing in front of Emily, he realised fear had finally caught up to him. Emily stood in the doorway, unsure if she should step in or turn back. Richard looked older than she remembered, his shoulders heavier, his eyes tired. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Emily," he said, his voice low. The silence stretched before he spoke again. "I know. I haven't exactly earned the right to ask for your time." His hand toyed with a pen, rolling it back and forth nervously. "There were mistakes, things I can't undo." Emily's gaze stayed steady. "You don't have to circle around it, Richard. I'm not here for rehearsed lines." He let out a short, humourless laugh. "You never did like when I tried to dress things up. You always wanted the truth plain and simple." His eyes met hers for a fleeting second, before drifting away again. "All I can say is, I thought I was doing what was best at the time. Looking back, maybe I was blind." There was weight in his words, but also restraint, like a man holding back more than he was ready to release. Emily felt it, the unsaid things hanging in the air. For a moment she thought he might finally name the choice that had torn them apart, but he didn't. He swallowed hard, shifted the papers on his desk and simply said, "Some roads, you can't walk back once you've taken them." Emily studied him, her heart caught between anger and sorrow. She didn't press, not yet. The truth he was avoiding would have to come on its own. Emily's fingers curled tight around the worn piece of metal until it pressed deep into her skin. Her voice shook, not from fear anymore, but from years of anger that had never been given a name. "You want to know what it was like after you left?" she began, her eyes fixed on him. "It was me holding my dad's arm while he tried to climb stairs he could barely walk. It was sitting in waiting rooms praying the doctors would take us even though we couldn't pay. It was watching the strongest man I knew break down because the world had chewed him up and spit him out." Her words hit like blows, each one heavier than the last. Richard's chest tightened, his eyes falling to the ground. "And you," she continued, her voice cracking, "you were the one person who swore I'd never face it alone. But the minute things got hard, you vanished. You built this shiny new life, forgot our street, forgot me, forgot the promise you carved into that fire escape like it was sacred. You left me to carry it all while you pretended none of it ever happened." Richard tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. All he could manage was a broken, "Emily, I was just a kid. I didn't know what to do." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Neither did I, but I didn't get to run. I had to stay. I had to grow up before I was ready. And you got to leave, to erase it all like we were nothing but a chapter you didn't feel like finishing." The room went silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was the heavy quiet of truth finally being spoken out loud. Richard finally lifted his eyes to hers. They weren't filled with rage now, only regret. For the first time in his adult life, he looked small, like the boy who had once stood frozen in the shadows, too scared to move, and had been running from that moment ever since. Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand, her voice low but steady. "I don't need your excuses, Ricky. I just need to know, do you even remember who you were before all of this?" Her question lingered in the dim light, demanding an answer he wasn't sure he could give. The meeting room had emptied out, leaving only the sound of the clock ticking on the far wall. Richard stayed seated at the long table, his tie loosened, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of years had finally caught up with him. Emily hesitated near the doorway, but he lifted his head and caught her in his tired gaze. "Emily," he began, his voice rough. "I've carried a lot of regrets in my life. Deals I shouldn't have made. People I should have treated better, but none of it compares to one thing." His hand pressed flat against the table as though steadying himself. "Letting you go was the biggest mistake I ever made." The words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. Richard didn't hide behind vague excuses this time. His eyes stayed locked on hers, no longer drifting away. "I told myself back then that ambition was everything, that sacrifice was necessary. But what I really sacrificed was you. And it wasn't worth it. It was never worth it." Emily felt her throat tighten. She had prepared herself for half-truths, for the same old guarded man. But this was different. This was Richard stripped of pride, standing in the ruins of his own choices. He leaned back slowly, his voice breaking just slightly. "You deserved a better man than the one I was, and I'll have to live with knowing I wasn't him." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of years unspoken, of wounds that could never fully heal, and of a truth that had finally been laid bare. Emily let the silence linger for a beat, then drew a slow breath. Her eyes didn't leave his, but her voice changed. It wasn't only about the past anymore. It was about right now. "You think you buried that night, Ricky," she said quietly. "But you didn't. You just built your life on top of it, and the cracks are showing. Do you even know what your company is doing out there?" Richard frowned, unsure where she was going. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, her tone sharp with conviction. "Your people are tearing down neighbourhoods like the one we grew up in. Buying out old buildings, pushing out families who have nowhere else to go. I've seen the letters slipped under doors, the threats dressed up in fancy legal words. You're not just running from the past anymore, you're repeating it." The words cut deeper than any accusation she'd thrown before. Richard's breath hitched and he tried to deny it. "I don't handle those details myself. I have teams, lawyers." Emily shook her head, her voice firm. "That's the problem. You don't look. You don't want to. But I've seen it. I've talked to the people being forced out. And every time I watch another family pack their things, I see my father's face all over again." Her hand tightened around the old keychain, her voice trembling with anger. "You promised we'd never forget where we came from. But you did, and now you're the one doing to others what we once feared the most." Richard's stomach sank. He had spent years telling himself he was building, creating, shaping a better city. But hearing it from her, hearing how his name was tied to eviction notices and broken families, made his empire feel like it was built on quicksand. For the first time he had no defence, only the hollow weight of truth pressing down on him. Emily's eyes softened just enough to let the ache slip through. "You asked who I am, standing here in front of you. I'm the reminder of everything you tried to leave behind. And I'm telling you, Ricky, you're standing on the edge of becoming the very monster you used to run from." Emily reached into her apron again, but this time it wasn't a keepsake she pulled out. It was a folded stack of papers, worn at the edges from being read too many times. She placed it on the table between them, sliding it toward him. "Go ahead," she said, her voice tight. "Read it." Richard hesitated, then unfolded the papers. His eyes moved over the words, formal notices, legal threats dressed up with complicated language. At the bottom of each page was the same name, Rodriguez. "She's lived in that building for nearly 50 years, Emily explained. A retired teacher. Her kids grew up there, her grandkids still visit on weekends. And now your company wants the land, so they send her these letters. Cut off her heat in the winter, shut down repairs until the walls are crumbling. Do you know what she said to me the last time I visited her? She said she was too old to start over, and she would rather die in that apartment than be forced out." Richard's throat went dry as he flipped through the pages. The words were cold, calculated, but the picture Emily painted made them feel like weapons. "She's not the only one," Emily continued, her voice breaking. "There are dozens like her, people who work 2 jobs just to keep up. People who came here with nothing and built their lives brick by brick only to watch you, your people, tear it all down because someone wants another luxury condo. You may not be the one writing these letters, Ricky, but they carry your name." He set the papers down slowly, his hand trembling. For years he had prided himself on being untouchable, a man who could justify every deal as just business. But staring at those notices, he felt the weight of every signature, every decision, pressing back against him. Emily's voice softened, but it cut even deeper. When I see Mrs. Rodriguez, I see my dad. I see the same fear, the same helplessness. You told me once that we'd get out together. But tell me, Ricky, what good is getting out if you turn into the thing we were trying to escape? Richard couldn't find an answer. The truth was sitting in front of him, scrawled in black ink and buried in Emily's eyes. Richard sat back, the stack of papers heavy in his lap. His mind raced, searching for a way to deny it, to push the blame onto some faceless department. But the name stamped on the letters wasn't just his company's, it was his. He rubbed his forehead, suddenly feeling older than his years. These notices, they shouldn't have been signed off without me knowing. Emily gave him a look that was half disbelief, half sorrow. And yet they were. Do you think Mrs. Rodriguez cares whether you read them or not? All she knows is that someone with your name on the door wants her gone. Her words landed hard, but beneath the sting was something even more unsettling. He thought about the man who handled acquisitions for him, the one who always promised results no matter how messy the details. A man Richard had called a friend for years. His stomach tightened. Daniel, he muttered under his breath. Emily caught the name. Who is that? Richard's jaw clenched. My deputy, the one I trusted to run property deals while I focused on the bigger picture. He's ambitious, sharp, always hungry for the next win. I thought he was just driven. But this... He gestured to the stack of papers. This has his fingerprints all over it. For the first time that night, anger flickered in Richard's eyes. Not the blind rage he'd unleashed in the diner, but a deeper fury mixed with betrayal. Emily leaned forward, her voice steady but filled with urgency. So now you know. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Because if you turn away again, Ricky, then you're no better than the men in that alley all those years ago. Her words brought the room back into focus, sharper than ever. Richard felt the weight of both past and present pressing on him. The boy who once ran was staring at the man he had become, and for the first time, he knew running wasn't an option anymore. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the machines. Richard lay propped against the pillows, his face pale, his breaths uneven but steady enough to speak. Emily sat close, her hand resting lightly on his, as if afraid the slightest movement might break the moment. Richard's eyes drifted toward the window where the late afternoon sun painted the sky in faded orange. You know, he said slowly, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I spent my whole life chasing things I thought mattered. Money, influence, respect. But none of it feels real anymore. He turned his head with effort, meeting her eyes. The only thing that feels real is you sitting here. After everything I did, after all the years I pushed you away. His lips trembled, a ghost of a smile forming. I don't deserve this kindness. I don't deserve you. Emily shook her head, tears blurring her vision. Don't say that, she whispered. You're still my father. A long silence settled between them, filled with the weight of unspoken years. Richard squeezed her hand weakly, as though holding on to more than just flesh and bone. If I could go back, he said, each word laboured but clear, I'd choose differently. I'd choose you, every single time. His chest rose with a deep, uneven breath, then eased again. There was no bitterness in his eyes now, only peace, as though admitting this truth had lifted the last burden he carried. Emily bowed her head, her tears falling freely, not just for the man he had been, but for the man he finally allowed himself to be in these last moments. After her father's words faded into the stillness of the room, Emily sat motionless, her hand still clasped in his. She could feel the fragility of his grip, each faint squeeze like a thread keeping him tethered to this world. For a moment she just listened to the sound of his breathing, uneven yet steady, and wondered if this was the first time in her life she had truly heard him. She remembered being a little girl, waiting by the window for him to come home. She remembered the nights when he did not, and the way her mother's face would harden with disappointment. For years she had carried that child's ache inside her, convincing herself it no longer mattered. But sitting here, with his tired hand in hers, she realised it had always mattered. It had shaped her, left cracks that no amount of success or independence could fully cover. Yet she also realised something else. Holding on to the hurt had given her strength, but letting go, choosing to release the weight of the past, might finally give her peace. She looked at him, not as the man who failed her, but as the man who was trying, even now, in the last stretch of his life, to make it right. Her thumb brushed gently over his knuckles. "I can't change what's behind us," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "But I can choose what I carry forward." The truth of that thought settled over her like a quiet promise. Whatever happened in the coming hours, she would no longer let bitterness be the story she told herself. She leaned closer, resting her forehead lightly against the back of his hand. "You chose me now," she murmured, her voice trembling but sure, "and that's enough." For the first time in years she felt the ache in her chest loosen, replaced by something fragile but real, acceptance. The next day, the lobby of Richard's headquarters was packed. Reporters crowded shoulder to shoulder, cameras clicking as he stepped up to the podium. The man who had once thrived on control felt his hands tremble against the wood, but he didn't hide it. For once the world would see him exactly as he was. The flash of cameras lit up his face. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but unpolished. "For years, I told myself I was building something good. I told myself I was giving this city progress. But I see now that I was blind to the damage done in my name. Families forced out, lives uprooted, people treated like obstacles instead of neighbours. That is on me." The room stirred, reporters scribbling furiously. Richard pressed on. "I can't undo the past. I can't erase the mistakes I made as a boy or the silence I carried into my adulthood. But I can choose what I do from this day forward, and I choose not to run anymore." He paused, looking straight into the cameras. "Starting today, my foundation will provide legal support for tenants facing wrongful evictions. We will fund repairs for buildings that have been neglected. And we will hold accountable anyone in my company who has profited by exploiting people who couldn't fight back. That includes those closest to me." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the polished spin they expected. It was messy, vulnerable. It was real. In the back of the room, Emily stood quietly, her arms crossed but her eyes fixed on him. She had come, though she hadn't promised she would. And when Richard's gaze met hers across the sea of cameras, something in him steadied. "This city made me who I am," he finished. "Not the boardrooms, not the skyscrapers. It was the streets, the neighbours, the people who had nothing but still gave me everything, and I will not forget them again." The room erupted with questions, microphones thrust forward. But Richard didn't linger. He stepped away from the podium, ignoring the chaos behind him. For the first time in his life, he felt lighter. Not because the fight was over, but because he had finally chosen to fight. Emily met him near the exit, her voice low but firm. "That was a start, Ricky. Now let's see if you mean it." Richard nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I do. And this time, I won't disappear." A week later, Richard found himself standing at the corner of the street he once called home. The buildings were older now, weathered by time, their bricks stained with rain and memory. Yet as he stood there, it felt like he had stepped back into the life of a boy who once dreamed on a rusted fire escape. Emily walked beside him, her hands tucked into her jacket. She hadn't said much during the ride over, but she didn't need to. The weight of this moment lived in the silence between them. They passed the small grocery where they used to sneak candy, now shuttered with a faded sign in the window. The fire escape still clung to the side of her old building, crooked and rusted, like it had been waiting for them all this time. Richard stopped, his chest tightening. "This is where we made the promise," he said softly. Emily nodded, pulling something from her pocket. It was the same half of the old keychain, edges worn smooth from years of being carried. She placed it in his hand without a word. Richard reached into his own coat. Days earlier he had searched through the boxes his mother had kept in storage, boxes he had never dared to open. And there, buried beneath old yearbooks and photographs, he had found it, the other half. He pulled it out now, setting it gently against hers. The pieces didn't fit perfectly anymore, the break jagged, time having worn them down differently. But together, they still formed the shape they were meant to. Emily's eyes glistened. It was never about escaping, was it? Richard shook his head, his voice rough. No, it was about remembering, about standing together no matter how hard it got. For the first time in years, Emily smiled, not with bitterness, but with something lighter, freer. Behind them, children's laughter drifted from the corner where a few kids kicked around a worn soccer ball. Life went on, just as it always had. But now, for Richard and Emily, it felt like they had finally stopped running. He turned to her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. I can't change what I did, Emily, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. She studied him for a long moment, then slipped the keychain halves back into his palm, closing his fingers around them. Then don't waste the chance. As they walked away from the street, side by side, there was no applause, no cameras, no headlines. Just two people carrying the weight of their past, and for the first time, sharing it. And that was enough. The past cannot be rewritten, but forgiveness can free the heart. Choosing compassion over resentment gives both the living and the dying a chance to find peace. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and presence here. If this story touched you, please give it a like and subscribe to support the channel. I'll see you again in the next video right here on Rain Inside.